Hey everybody, so this is going to be the last video for chapter 14. This is just quickly going over the general strengths and weaknesses of single case designs. In general, I already said general, I said general twice. But yes, just overall, um, we're going to be addressing learning objective number 11, which is identifying the advantages and disadvantages of single case designs compared to traditional group designs. So, we've talked all about what single case designs can look like, but overall, how does that compare to all the other more traditional group designs that we've talked about in the course prior to this point? So just as a reminder, there's three fundamental differences between these single case designs we've been talking about and the traditional group designs that you normally think of when you think of studies and experiments and the things that we have talked about before this chapter started. And so the first one is that there are only one or very few participants involved in a single case design instead of a large group of participants or several groups of participants that happen in the traditional designs. The second fundamental difference is that there's more flexibility with single case designs. More specifically, you can modify or change a treatment or manipulation during the study just because of how the participants are reacting, and it doesn't influence the integrity of the design at all. And whereas, like in the traditional group designs, if you were to do that, that would obviously compromise the design of your study. You wouldn't be able to do that. So it is definitely more flexible. And the third fundamental difference is that it requires continuous assessment. So in more traditional experiments and studies, you typically only observe or score or write down things for the participants once, maybe twice, maybe three times, but it's very few observations. With a single case design, there's a series of observations, as your baseline, and then another series of observations for the treatment. And then if you do more phases, there's more observations. And so there's a lot. I think your book actually said something between 10 and 20 observations or assessments is an average for these kinds of studies. So that's obviously a lot more than these more traditional designs. So we talked about this. So what are the advantages and the disadvantages of what I just talked about? So the advantages are that it allows the researchers to establish that cause and effect relationship with only one participant or few participants. So and obviously there's an advantage to that. If you aren't able to study or assess a lot of different participants, you don't have to with this design. The main advantage for this particular point is that experimental research can be integrated into applied clinical practice. We've talked a lot about clinical examples of this, how this is used a lot in clinical practice, and also not just clinical applications, but just the advantages of being able to study for these clinicians to study these participants in ways that they would not be able to study in these treatments, in ways that they would not ethically be able to study in a large group. So that's a huge advantage. Flexibility is also is an advantage. We kind of talked about that a second ago. Again, they can modify and change the treatment. And this is helping from a clinical perspective in the sense that, if a treatment's not working for a participant, you can modify it to help them. And also ethically, if a treatment isn't effective, or if a treatment is actually, causing, side effects or, something like that, you can stop it and change it to something else or modify it without it affecting the experimental part of the study. And Lastly, there's no need to standardize treatment across groups. So you can tailor the treatment to the individual's needs. Again, you wouldn't be able to do that with a large group of participants. You have to standardize it across, groups and participants for that kind of study. But for this, you can, change it and tailor it to their specific needs. And so, mainly overall, here, the best part about a single case or single subject design is that you are combining the clinical advantages of a case study with the rigor of a true experiment, so that you can demonstrate those cause and effect relationships in a more clinical way or a more clinical setting that you aren't able to do with large group designs. Um, Now, of course, there are also disadvantages. There's always give and take with everything. Um, and so the disadvantages are that the first one is that there's a relationship the relationship among variables is only for one participant or subject. Again, meaning that you can't necessarily generalize that to larger populations. So that can threaten the external validity. Single case designs are not strong. They're not strong in external validity. They're weak in external validity. But the upside, or the way to kind of combat this, is the fact that a lot of times when researchers or clinicians are instituting a single case design, it's because there's already been research done um, in the more traditional designs, either quasi-experimental, a lot of times it's for clinical, or even experimental, and or case studies, or whatever. There's other research that has been done that is high in external validity, that shows that this applies to that should be able to be applied to lots of different people, or lots of people. And so the researchers is taking that and using it in a more narrowed way, with their particular patient. And so the single case design is maybe weak in external validity, but it has other studies usually backing it up that are strong in external validity. And the those other studies that are high in external validity may not be as high in internal validity, whereas the single case designs are likely going to be higher in internal validity, because they can show pretty clearly visually with those graphs the cause and effect relationship, and they're able to do it in a very detailed way because you're only looking at one participant. And another disadvantage is that there's multiple continuous observations that you have to do. And just like with a within subjects design we've talked about in other experimental designs, in quasi-experimental, this can threaten the internal validity, possibly because of the reactivity of the participant. So the participant may change their behavior when they know they're being observed for a long period of time, or they may just, maybe it's even unconscious, they're just, acting differently, or especially because there's multiple continuous observations, they may just eventually get to the point where they're over being observed. They're just over it. And so anything that changes their behavior, obviously, just from the fact that you're observing them, is considered a threat to internal validity, because it may um, prevent you from being able to see the effectiveness of the treatment. And then absence of statistical controls is the last disadvantage, meaning we don't use statistical analysis for this. We rely on those graphs. It's a visual display of data. And so because of that, the treatment effects have to be large and immediate in order to be convincing, because we don't have numbers to do any sort of convincing. And so your book talks about how single case designs are usually considered practically significant if they have that large and immediate change. They're usually considered to be practically significant instead of statistically significant. And your book talks about how a lot of times studies, um, other even more traditional group designs talk about the difference between practical and statistical significance, because statistical significance, that's hard to say fast, um, is just simply saying that these results did not occur by chance. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's practically significant, that it's producing a large and immediate change, which is what you can see through single case designs. And so having something that shows high practical significance may be more meaningful for people. So those disadvantages, can also be advantages depending on how you look at it. Okay, and so before we get to that, let's do our learning check. Single case research studies tend to have, and if you look through these answers, it's literally what I was just talking about. Spoiler alert, it's practical significance, even though they do not have statistical significance. So again, there's no statistical analysis, so you won't ever hear anything about statistical significance in single case or single subjects research designs. But practical significance will definitely be discussed, especially if you see that large and immediate change. So that is the answer for that one. And then number two, there's only two on this one, is which of the following is an advantage of single case designs compared to traditional group designs? And they can be used with one participant. That is true. They are valuable in clinical settings. That is also an advantage of single case designs. And they allow for an experiment to be conducted on a single individual. Again, that is also true. Because most in a traditional experiment, you are not using one individual. Remember, you're using lots of individuals. So this allows you to do that. And so obviously the answer is that all three of those are all advantages of single case designs. Okay, so back to our slides. This is the review of the whole chapter, because we are done with chapter 14 now. And so this is that self-assessment that we always do. So with our 14.1 video, what are the characteristics of single case experimental research designs? Remember, that's that baseline, repeated observations, and replication components. You got to have all three of those components in order to be considered single case experimental research design. And then in our 14.2 video, we talked about the phases used in single case experimental research designs. And that's to show change in pattern when the treatment is initiated or introduced. And you need to have that level or trend stability established in the phase before you move on to the next phase. In 14.3, we talked about what are the strengths and weaknesses of reversal designs. That, as a reminder, is a strong showing, the advantage is strong showing of the cause and effect relationship. You're able to see that very clearly, but the disadvantage is that there's the ethical concerns of removing the treatment, and also it can only be used on short-term treatments because, again, if you have to remove it and go back to baseline, they may not go back to baseline. And then in 14.4, we talked about what are the advantages and disadvantages of multiple baseline designs. And again, that is that there's the advantage is that there's no reversal, so you don't have to worry about that. The disadvantages we just talked about, you don't have to worry about those. And also you can use them in those long-term treatment situations. But the disadvantages is that it's more complex, possibly, especially if it's hard to individualize out the behaviors or the individual differences in participants can make those effects harder to see or less convincing visually. And then in this video, we talked about what are the general strengths and weaknesses of single case designs overall. And so we talked about the advantages, the strengths being that you can use one participant, that it's very flexible and you can modify it during the course of the study, and that you can use it in clinical settings, and that you can tailor it and individualize it to the patient or the participant. Um, the weaknesses are that it doesn't have very high external validity or generalization, that you have to worry about possible reactivity with the participant being observed for a long time, and that can threaten the internal validity, and that there's no statistics involved, that you are relying on that visual data to be convincing. So that is it for chapter 14. We have our summary, which is again just our learning objectives. Um, so here are the first five, and make sure that you either look at these in your book or screenshot these here. And then here's the other six. Make sure you understand these and know what these things are talking about, so that you can make sure that you've mastered this material, and that you can do your best on your quizzes and on your final that is coming up soon. So if you guys have any questions about chapter 14 at all, let me know.